My name is Clara Bennett, and at 34, I've carved out a thriving career in corporate law. Yet, no matter my accomplishments, I've never measured up in the eyes of my father. With the annual family gathering looming, I felt a familiar dread. But this year, I decided to make a bold move. I purchased a high-end SUV as a gift for him, hoping it might finally bridge the gap between us. Unbeknownst to me, a single document tucked in my bag would unravel everything. By the end of the night, I'd uncover the truth behind my father's distance. Before I dive into my story, let me know where you're reading from. And if you've ever confronted someone who couldn't see your value, give this a like and follow for more. My journey might just inspire you to find your own strength. Growing up in a wealthy Chicago suburb, our family seemed flawless to outsiders, polished, prosperous, untouchable. But behind closed doors, the reality was far colder. My father, Edward Bennett, had built his commercial construction empire from humble roots into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He prized achievement, prestige, and control above all else, often at the expense of family bonds. From my earliest memories, he was never the warm, engaged dad who showed up to recitals or helped with science projects. Instead, he was the stern judge, quick to point out that my A- should have been an A, that I should have been class president instead of vice president, that coming in second was just losing with extra steps. My mother, Lillian, was his opposite in private. Kind, nurturing, always ready with a hug when Edward wasn't around. But in his presence, she transformed, becoming quiet, deferential, her eyes flickering to him for approval before answering even mundane questions about grocery lists or vacation plans. It was a dynamic I only pieced together as an adult. This strange hold he had over her, the way she seemed to shrink to avoid his disapproval. My siblings and I navigated this tense household in our own ways. My older brother, Nathan, 4 years my senior, was the undeniable favorite. He excelled at lacrosse, aced his exams, dated girls from approved families, and seamlessly followed Edward into the construction business after graduating from our father's alma mater. Nathan seemed to instinctively know how to please him, while I was perpetually off the mark. My younger sister, Emily, 3 years my junior, wasn't the star Nathan was, but she had a knack for reading the room. She knew when to charm, when to stay silent, and somehow managed to soften Edward's sharper edges. She was the family's diplomat, slipping into my room after his harshest critiques to reassure me that I wasn't as much of a failure as he made me feel. For me, though, nothing ever sufficed. I graduated valedictorian in high school and earned a full scholarship to Stanford, despite Edward's insistence that I attend his university, viewing my choice as a personal slight. In college, I juggled a double major and a part-time job, yet he'd grill me during holidays about why I wasn't interning at top-tier law firms. After graduation, I turned down his lukewarm offer to join his company, knowing I'd be seen as a token hire. Instead, I moved to San Francisco with a single suitcase and sheer determination, crashing on a friend's floor while applying to every law firm in the city. When I landed a junior associate position at a prestigious firm, his only comment was, "Let's see if you can handle the pressure." I did more than handle it. Over 9 years, I climbed the ranks through grit and late nights, no family connections to pave the way. Just last month, I'd been promoted to partner, one of the youngest in the firm's history. The salary increase let me buy a sleek condo in the Bay Area with savings to spare. It was with those savings, that I made what I hoped would be a game-changing gesture, a brand new Range Rover for Edward, a Father's Day gift I thought would finally earn his respect. The SUV cost nearly a year's worth of my earnings, but I told myself it was worth it for a chance to hear him say he was proud. Looking back, I see how that desperate need for his approval shaped every milestone, not for my own joy, but as ammunition in a futile battle for his love. The annual Bennett family reunion always fell on the first weekend of July, conveniently near Father's Day, doubling as a celebration of Edward's role as family patriarch. This year, I aim to stand out with that extravagant Range Rover, a gleaming silver model with every luxury feature he'd once admired at a business associate's lake house. As the date neared, my anxiety skyrocketed. I spent weeks hunting for the perfect outfit, professional yet approachable, powerful yet not ostentatious, the impossible balance Edward seemed to demand of women in my field. I chose a tailored charcoal blazer and skirt from a designer Lillian said he respected, paired with understated pearl earrings and heels that were costly but subtle. The ritual felt humiliating, a grown woman still chasing her father's nod of approval at 34. Past reunions haunted me as I packed. At 15, when I won a national essay contest, he'd asked why I hadn't aimed for a science fair, since writers are a dime a dozen. When I graduated college with honors, he remarked that law was a cutthroat field compared to construction stability. My first big case win prompted him to muse if I'd been chosen for optics rather than skill. No achievement ever stood on its own. Each was shadowed by his doubt. This year, though, carried a heavier weight. 4 months earlier, a casual DNA test I'd taken to explore my heritage revealed a bombshell. My genetic profile didn't match Edward Bennett's. Stunned, I discreetly arranged a second test, using a sample from his comb during a quick visit home. The results, now sealed in an envelope in my bag, confirmed it. I wasn't his biological daughter. The revelation explained so much: the persistent sense of being an outsider, the slight physical differences no one named, the coldness from a man who showed at least minimal warmth to Nathan and Emily. I suspected he'd always known, and that truth had shaped every moment between us. The day before the reunion, I drove the Range Rover to my parents' sprawling Chicago estate, the envelope burning a hole in my purse, unsure if I'd have the courage to confront the past. Having arranged for the Range Rover to be delivered to a local dealership, I'd meticulously planned the reveal. I arrived at my parents' Chicago estate mid-afternoon, knowing Lillian would be at her book club, ensuring a private moment for this olive branch. Edward answered the door in his usual pressed polo and slacks, despite it being Saturday, his expression one of mild irritation at the unscheduled visit. "Clara, you're early. The reunion's tomorrow," he said, glancing at his watch as if I'd disrupted a board meeting. "I know, Dad. I brought your Father's Day gift early and wanted to give it to you alone," I said, my pulse racing as I handed him a sleek box containing the car key, the Range Rover logo unmistakable. He opened it with the detached courtesy he reserved for perfunctory gestures, his brows lifting slightly at the sight. "Is this a prank?" he asked, and I gestured to the front window where the silver SUV gleamed in the driveway. His face showed a flicker of genuine surprise, maybe even delight, but it quickly hardened into his usual scrutiny. "This is extravagant, Clara." "What's the point of this?" he asked, already striding toward the door, key in hand. "No point," I lied. I got a big promotion and wanted to do something meaningful for you." He inspected the vehicle like it was a contract, circling it twice, asking sharp questions about the lease terms and fuel efficiency that felt more like a cross-examination than appreciation. After a short test drive, where he remarked the suspension was stiffer than expected, despite its top-tier engineering, he parked it in the garage, out of sight, as if it were an embarrassment. His thanks were curt, followed by, "You must have money to burn," slicing through my hopes like a paper cut. That night, from my hotel room, I called my best friend, Mia, choking back tears as I recounted the chilly reception. "Screw him, Clara," Mia said with the fierce loyalty of someone who'd heard these stories too often. "Return the car. He doesn't deserve it." I brushed off the idea, still clinging to the fantasy that tomorrow, in front of others, he might show some pride. "Just promise me you won't show him that DNA test," Mia warned before we hung up. "Not unless you're ready for total chaos." I promised, but the envelope stayed in my bag, a dangerous secret I couldn't let go. Sunday arrived with flawless July weather. Clear skies, a soft breeze, as if nature itself were mocking the tension of the Bennett family reunion. I took the scenic route to my parents' estate, using the drive to rehearse responses to the inevitable probes about my single status, my career, my failure to settle down at the ripe age of 34. My hands gripped the steering wheel as I pulled into the oak-lined driveway, already crowded with the gleaming cars of relatives and Edward's business allies, who somehow always crashed our family events. To my surprise, the Range Rover was now parked prominently near the front entrance, no longer hidden in the garage, positioned where every guest would see it. I took a deep breath, smoothed my charcoal skirt, checked my reflection, and walked toward the grand front door with the confidence I'd honed in courtrooms filled with skeptics. Lillian greeted me, her face warm as she pulled me into a hug, whispering, "You look stunning, sweetheart," before adding, "Your father's in the backyard with the Harrington group," her tone a subtle heads-up. The foyer buzzed with relatives, a mix of true family and Edward's hand-picked network, treated like honorary Bennets. My Aunt Margaret, Lillian's sister, swooped in with air kisses and nosy questions about my dating life, while Uncle Tom clapped my shoulder, booming, "There's our legal eagle," a nickname I knew would grate on Edward if he overheard. Cousins, distant relatives, and family friends mingled in familiar patterns, recycling the same small talk with slight variations, everyone playing their part in the Bennett family charade. Edward's entrance was as staged as ever, strolling in from the backyard with a trio of business associates, all chuckling at some mildly amusing remark, elevated by his wealth. His gaze swept the room, offering nods to guests until it landed on me. A brief flicker of acknowledgement, then a slight frown, before he nodded as he had to second cousins, and turned to whisper to Lillian. No special greeting for me, his middle child, the daughter who'd just gifted him a vehicle worth a small fortune. I feigned indifference, chatting with my cousin Lauren about her nursing program, but the sting of his dismissal burned. Lillian appeared at my side moments later, touching my arm. "Sweetheart, your father mentioned the new car you gave him. That was so thoughtful," she said, her eyes a mix of gratitude and worry about the cost. "Come say hello to the Wilsons. They just returned from a legal summit in London and would love your perspective." This was Lillian's way, always smoothing edges, creating excuses for interactions that should have been effortless. Nathan arrived fashionably late, as usual, making a grand entrance with his flawless wife, Olivia, and their 2 photogenic kids, earning the warm hug from Edward I'd chased for decades. "Dad, that Range Rover is incredible. When did you decide to splurge?" Nathan asked, and I watched, stunned, as Edward slapped his back and said, "You've got to reward success, son," without a word about my gift. Emily intercepted me before I could process the slight, pulling me into a tight hug. "I heard about your partnership, Clara." "That's huge," she whispered, using my old nickname, C, that no one else did. Her sincerity soothed, but it only underscored Edward's coldness. As hors d'oeuvres circulated on trays carried by hired staff, I noticed Edward leading a group of his colleagues to the front drive, gesturing animatedly at the Range Rover through the tall windows. He was showing it off, opening doors, highlighting features, his face alight with a pride he'd never aimed at me. "He's been at it all morning," Emily murmured, appearing beside me with a glass of wine I gratefully took. 3 tours for different groups of his buddies. Mom told me you bought it for him. That was beyond generous, see? Generosity wasn't the goal, I admitted softly. I just wanted him to see me as enough. Just once. Pathetic, isn't it? Emily squeezed my arm. Not pathetic. Human. But Clara, you need to understand something. She paused, choosing her words. Dad can't give you what you want. Not because you're not worthy, but because something in him doesn't work right when it comes to you. It's not your fault. Her words landed like a punch, not new, but raw in their truth, spoken aloud by someone else. The DNA test in my bag felt heavier, a loaded gun I both dreaded and yearned to fire. The hour before dinner unfolded in the predictable rhythm of Bennett gatherings, everyone drifting to the formal parlor, with its stiff, museum-like furniture and decor chosen by Lillian, but vetted by Edward, the one area where his taste ruled. The room was a stage, and we were all actors in his carefully directed production. I positioned myself on a cushioned bench near the parlor's bay window, slightly apart from the main group, sipping my second glass of wine and observing the Bennett family dynamics with a strange new lens. The DNA test results, tucked in my purse, gave me an almost clinical detachment, as if I were studying a dysfunctional tribe. Nathan, as always, held court, recounting his latest triumph, a failing strip mall he'd snapped up to convert into high-end lofts. The numbers scared off my investors, but I saw the upside they didn't, he said, basking in Edward's approving nod from his tufted armchair. That's the Bennett edge, Edward cut in, his voice brimming with pride. Spotting potential where others see risk. It's in our blood. The irony of his words hit me like a slap, the envelope in my purse growing heavier with every mention of lineage. The conversation inevitably turned to me. Clara, Edward mentioned you've climbed the ranks at your firm, my Uncle Richard said, his tone warm. Partner at your age. That's remarkable. Before I could respond, Edward cleared his throat. It's a solid start, but law's a fickle game. Always has been. Not like real estate. Something you can touch. Something that lasts, he said, pivoting back to Nathan. Land endures market swings. It's a legacy. The familiar jab stung. Despite my bracing for it, his words framing my career as fleeting compared to Nathan's real work. Actually, I said, channeling the steady tone I used in high-stakes depositions, my team's case settlements Last quarter brought in $12 million in fees, with a risk model I designed now rolled out firm-wide. It's held steady through market dips. A ripple of impressed silence followed, but Edward waved it off. Numbers on a screen. Let's see how they fare in a downturn, he said, turning to his associate Paul. Speaking of real assets, what's your take on the zoning shifts in the Evanston corridor? I excused myself to refill my glass, running into Emily in the hallway as she returned from checking on her kids in the backyard. Don't let him get to you, she whispered, squeezing my arm. I heard about your risk model from Tom's cousin-in-law. It's making waves. Her words warmed me, but the need for such validation at 34 felt pitiful. As I neared the bar in the dining room, I overheard Edward's voice from his study, the door slightly ajar. The Range Rover? Quite the upgrade. When you build something from scratch like I have, you earn these things, he said. The responding voice was Walter Harrington, Edward's occasional rival and ally. Edward, you sly fox, always downplaying. Clara mentioned she bought it for you when we spoke earlier. Said it was tied to her big promotion. She's carving out quite a name in San Francisco. A pause, then Edward's voice, each word deliberate. Yes. Well, Clara's always been hungry for approval. Truth is, her success comes from the foundation I laid. Elite schools, the work ethic I drilled into all my kids. The car's just her way of proving she's finally using what I gave her. The erasure of my hard-earned achievements, recast as his doing, sent a surge of rage through me so sharp, I nearly dropped my wine glass. He went on, claiming he'd pushed me harder than Nathan or Emily, because I needed the discipline, framing himself as the mastermind behind successes he'd only ever belittled. I stepped back before they could spot me, my anger hardening into a clear, cold resolve. In the main hall, Nathan caught me, his expression unusually stern. Clara, a word. He steered me to a quiet corner near Lillian's prized fern collection. Dad says you've been asking Mom odd questions about her pre-marriage days. What are you after? His bluntness threw me. After the DNA test, I'd casually asked Lillian about her college years, probing for hints of past relationships, thinking I'd been discreet. Just curious about her life, I said carefully. Women of her era didn't get much chance to define themselves before family took over. Nathan studied me with Edward's piercing gaze, the family resemblance now a painful reminder of my outsider status. Whatever you're chasing, whatever point you're trying to make with that SUV or these questions, drop it. This family has a balance. Don't upset it with some personal crusade. His condescension, so like Edward's, nearly made me laugh. Balance? You mean a system where one kid's wins are celebrated and another's are dismissed? I'm not chasing anything, Nathan. I'm just seeing things for what they are. Before he could reply, our cousin Lauren approached, sensing the tension. Everything okay? Aunt Lillian's looking for you both. Dinner's about to start. Nathan flashed his golden sun smile, seamless as ever. Just catching up with my sister. Work stuff. No big deal. As he walked off, Lauren touched my arm. My dad always says Edward plays favorites, like it's his job. For what it's worth, what you've done on your own is incredible. Her quiet support cracked my composure, the acknowledgement of Edward's bias both validating and shattering. For years, I'd told myself I was misreading the dynamic. Having someone else name it made it undeniable. The dinner bell rang. Lillian's cue for everyone to move to the formal dining room. I lingered, my fingers grazing the envelope in my purse, weighing the chaos it could unleash. Part of me wanted to flee, to escape this facade of family before it could wound me further, but a fiercer part refused to run, determined to face the rejection head-on with the truth in that envelope. I checked it one last time, ensuring the results were still sealed, then squared my shoulders and headed to the dining room, bracing for the act to come. The Bennett dining room was a mirror of our family. A grand oak table, seating 20, yet cold and impersonal, with stern ancestral portraits and ornate place settings, prioritizing form over warmth. Lillian had gone all out, crystal goblets glinting under the chandelier, precise floral arrangements, name cards and elegant script, dictating everyone's place in Edward's hierarchy. My card placed me far from the head, between Lauren's husband, whom I barely knew, and one of Edward's junior associates, safely out of key conversations. Nathan and his family sat near Edward at the table's head, with Emily and her husband as buffers between the inner circle and lesser guests. Lillian sat at the far end, her role clear, equal in name, distant in reality. The first course arrived with choreographed precision, staff setting down plates of grilled prawns with herb garnish. Edward stood, wineglass raised, silencing the room without effort. "Welcome, family and friends, to our annual gathering," he began, his public charm gleaming. "Each year, I'm reminded of the legacy I've built. Not just a business, but a family." His gaze lingered on Nathan, who nodded proudly, then Emily, who smiled softly, before passing over me like I was part of the decor. "A special welcome to the Harrington group joining us today," he added, his voice warm with the confidence of a man who'd scripted his world. Edward continued, nodding to his business associates. "Surround yourself with success, and more follows," he said, his toast weaving praise for Nathan's latest venture, Emily's charity work, and a veiled jab at those who stray from proven paths, his eyes flicking to me with clear intent. As the 5-course meal unfolded, Edward steered the conversation with subtle prompts and pointed questions, keeping it within his comfort zone. Construction trends, local politics he influenced, and sports talk that inevitably circled back to Nathan's high school lacrosse glory. When Lillian tried to mention my partnership during a pause, Edward cut in smoothly. "Speaking of markets, Paul, what's your read on the Fed's new policy?" he asked, erasing her attempt without a trace. By the seafood course, the pattern was unmistakable. Edward lobbed questions my way, each a subtle barb designed to diminish. "Clara, your firm focuses on domestic cases, right? A bit narrow in today's global market, isn't it? Or, I heard your promotion followed the Kessler case. Lucky break that Nathan connected you with their VP at last year's fundraiser." Each remark reframed my achievements as limited or tied to family strings I'd never pulled. I kept my composure, honed in hostile courtrooms. "Actually, Dad, our global division adopted my case strategy last quarter, and the Kessler win came from a competitive bid. No introductions needed," I said lightly, noting Emily's sympathetic glance across the table. The dance was familiar, its sting predictable. The main course, roasted lamb with truffle risotto, demanded focus, offering a brief reprieve from the verbal gauntlet. Edward opened another bottle of vintage Bordeaux, his drinking a steady climb that Lillian tracked with worried eyes. Nathan whispered something to him, earning a curt dismissal. As dessert, poached pears with mascarpone arrived with coffee. Edward's gaze swung back to me, his filters loosened by wine. Clara. Still unattached, I hear, Mrs. Harrington said kindly. A successful woman like you? The men in San Francisco must be daunted. Before I could pivot to my career focus, Edward cut in, swirling his whiskey. Clara's always been more about proving a point than building a life, he said. Some chase titles to patch over what's missing. Family demands balance. Something Bennett women have historically grasped better. The barb landed with surgical precision, framing my career as a substitute for personal failure. Lillian's sharp gasp echoed from her end of the table. Edward, she began, her voice firm, but he pressed on as if she hadn't spoken. If Clara had considered the matches I suggested years ago, instead of calling them uninspired, she might not be staring down her mid-30s alone. The words, cloaked as fatherly advice, were a public dissection of my choices. The old urge to bolt surged, clashing with my resolve to stay composed. I sipped my water, my hand steady, despite the storm inside. I appreciate your concern, Dad, I said evenly, drawing on every mediation tactic I knew. But, as you've always said, Bennett's prioritize results. Mine speak for themselves. A heavy silence fell, relatives staring at their plates, Edward's associates suddenly fascinated by the chandelier. The pressure in my chest grew, a lifetime of these moments. Public slights, erased achievements, piling up. The envelope in my purse felt alive, a dangerous option I'd sworn to Mia I wouldn't use. As staff cleared dessert, Edward leaned back, a signal every Bennett knew. His annual speech was coming. The room stilled, forks set down, conversations cut off, all eyes on the patriarch. He stood, whiskey glass in hand, his face settling into the benevolent authority he wore for public moments. Before we move to the lawn for our family photo, he began, his voice rich with practiced gravitas, I want to reflect on what the Bennett family builds together. He gestured to include his associates, as if they were part of his legacy. A family is like a company. Vision, leadership, and people who know their roles drive success. His gaze swept the table, avoiding true connection. I'm fortunate to have children who add to our name in meaningful ways, he said, raising his glass to Nathan. Nathan, your deal-making sets a standard, not just for me, but for Chicago's construction scene. The Lakeshore Project shows the bold thinking that defines Bennett Ventures. You've taken my lessons and run with them. Nathan nodded, his humility a thin mask for his pride, the favored son anointed. Edward turned to Emily, his tone softening. Emily, your poise in juggling family and civic work is remarkable. Your role on the Women's Shelter Board brings real honor to our name. Showing success means giving back. Your mother and I are so proud of the family you're raising. Emily smiled, genuine but uneasy in the spotlight, always happier lifting others up. I braced for the usual omission, the silence where my name should be, a tactic that said more than outright criticism. But what came was worse. Edward's eyes locked on me, a glint of calculation in them. As I look at my children's paths, he said, his voice shifting to feigned warmth, I'm struck by how success can be misjudged. He sipped his whiskey, letting the pause stretch. I'm proud of all my children, he said, raising his glass, and for a fleeting second, hope flickered, until his next words, except for the one who'd rather chase empty titles than contribute to our legacy. The words hit like a blade, followed by a stunned silence. Nervous laughter broke out, guests assuming it was a family jest, not the public gutting it was. My face burned, then went cold, every eye on me, some embarrassed, some pitying, some curious. Edward pressed on, as if he'd commented on the wine. Some measure success by promotions and paychecks, flashy gestures that shine briefly but lack depth. Real success is building on tradition, strengthening what's proven, not chasing solo glory at the family's expense. The vague "some" fooled no one. The target was clear. Lillian's face was ashen, her napkin twisted in her hands. Nathan looked smug, Emily horrified. Lauren reached across her husband, her hand grazing mine in silent support, but I barely felt it. My focus narrowed to Edward, the man who just confirmed what the DNA test had already shown. I was an outsider, not truly his in his eyes. For a moment that felt eternal, I sat frozen, cataloging the physical toll, racing pulse, tight throat, the adrenaline urging me to run or fight. A montage of past slights flashed. Every corrected achievement, every undermined milestone, all reinforcing that I was never enough. The envelope in my purse seemed to hum, its truth a weapon I could no longer ignore. This wasn't just rejection. It was a deliberate campaign to erase me, continuing to seek approval from a man who couldn't give it, not because of my failings, but because of a secret he might already know. Was a cycle I couldn't sustain. As staff poured brandy to close the meal, I made a decision. I wouldn't flee, but I wouldn't stay silent either. The truth in that envelope was my way out, not just of this dinner, but of a lifetime of chasing a love that didn't exist. I carried a name that science had recently proven wasn't mine to claim. As Edward wrapped his speech with a hollow nod to family unity, the sting of his pointed exclusion severed something final inside me. The desperate girl chasing his approval dissolved, replaced by a woman who saw, with piercing clarity, the futility of that lifelong pursuit. The envelope in my purse shifted from a heavy secret to a key, to freedom. Its contents no longer a source of shame, but a tool to dismantle the cage of false expectations I'd lived in for 34 years. The room hung in uneasy silence, waiting for my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or a rushed exit, the usual end to the Bennett family drama. Instead, a calm resolve settled over me, a decision forming without conscious thought. I stood, the motion smooth and deliberate, drawing every eye in the room. Conversations stopped, faces turning with a mix of curiosity and unease, especially from those who'd seen past Bennett confrontations. I left my wine glass on the table, the refusal to toast a silent rebellion. Smoothing my skirt, I was surprised by the steady calm that had replaced my earlier turmoil, as if I'd stepped into the eye of a storm. "Thank you, Dad, for that revealing speech," I began, my voice clear and steady, honed from years in courtrooms. I've spent 34 years chasing approval that was never coming, meeting standards that shifted every time I got close. Today, I finally understand why. The room went still, a heavy silence signaling something momentous. Lillian's face was a mask of panic, while Edward's hardened, sensing the script veering off his control. "For those keeping track," I continued, my tone light but deliberate. "I graduated top of my class from Stanford, built a career without family favors, and became one of the youngest partners in my firm's history. By most measures, not exactly a failure." My gaze swept the table, catching nods from a few relatives before locking on Edward. But success in Edward Bennett's world isn't about results, is it? It's about fitting his mold, reflecting his glory, not shining on your own. I reached for my purse, every move watched, the spectacle of the compliant middle child breaking rank, too gripping to ignore. "I bought you an SUV worth a year's salary," I said directly to Edward, whose face tightened into the cold mask he wore in tough negotiations. Not because you needed it, or deserved it, but because I still hoped a grand gesture could close the gap between us, a gap I felt my whole life. I pulled the envelope from my purse, its plain exterior belying the explosive truth inside. For 34 years, I blamed myself for your distance, thinking I wasn't enough. I reshaped myself to earn your love, never realizing the issue wasn't my effort. It was my DNA. A collective gasp rippled through the table as the words sank in. Lillian's face went pale. Nathan sat up sharply, and Emily's eyes widened. I placed the envelope in the table's center, deliberate and calm. For you, Dad. Happy Father's Day, I said, the title laced with irony. Without waiting for a reply, I turned and walked out, back straight, pace steady, reclaiming the dignity Edward had stripped away all evening. The silence held until I reached the foyer, then erupted into a chaos of voices, questions, exclamations, overlapping into a blur. I stepped outside, the cool July air soothing my flushed skin. The path to the driveway glowed under solar lanterns, and the Range Rover sat where Edward had parked it for show, its silver finish catching the house lights, a symbol of my futile attempt to buy his love. Without hesitation, I pulled the spare key fob from my purse. The soft chirp of the unlock felt almost comically gentle for the moment. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather still carrying the faint scent of Edward's aftershave, a trace of his brief claim on what was never truly his. Through the windshield, I saw silhouettes at the dining room windows, gesturing wildly, the fallout of my exit unfolding. The engine hummed to life, the dashboard glowing as if this were just another drive, not a break from 34 years of emotional captivity. As I reversed down the driveway, the front door flew open, Edward's figure framed in the light, clutching the opened envelope. His mouth moved, perhaps shouting my name, but the engine's purr drowned it out. The symmetry was poetic. The SUV he'd paraded as his own, minimizing my role, now reclaimed, just as he'd tried to erase my existence for decades. The realization hardened my impulsive act into a deliberate choice. Taking back the gift mirrored my reclaiming of self-worth, unburdened by his withheld gratitude. In the rearview mirror, the Bennett estate shrank, its grandeur fading with distance, its emotional grip loosening with every turn of the wheels. The feeling in my chest wasn't joy, too raw and complex for that, but a new sense of freedom, my choices no longer warped by the need for Edward's approval. I was nearly at the highway when my phone lit up with Emily's name, followed by Nathan, Lillian, and several cousins, a digital storm of the chaos I'd left behind. I silenced the ringer, but kept the phone on, needing to see the aftermath, even if I wasn't ready to face it. As I merged onto the highway toward downtown Chicago, not back to San Francisco, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Edward stood in the street, his composed facade gone, arms raised in a primal gesture. Anger, maybe, or something deeper I couldn't name. The image seared into my mind as I sped away, a snapshot of the rupture I'd caused, the Bennett narrative shattered by a few pages of genetic truth, and one moment of clarity. At a downtown Chicago hotel 40 minutes later, my phone showed 19 missed calls and 34 texts, a digital echo of the explosion I'd ignited. I set the room key on the desk, slipped off my heels, and scanned the messages. Emily's texts ranged from shock, "Clara, what was that? What's in the envelope?" to worry, "Please call, everyone's losing it," to updates. Dad's ranting, Mom's crying in her room, Nathan's talking lawsuits over the car. Lillian's voicemails started calm. "Clara, please call when you can," but grew frantic by the 6th. "The test must be wrong. There's been a mistake. Come back so we can talk." Nathan sent 3 texts, each threatening legal action if I didn't return Dad's property and retract your baseless claims. Their reactions fit their roles. Emily, the peacemaker. Nathan, the enforcer. Lillian, the denier. Sitting on the hotel bed, phone in hand, the distance from the reunion gave me clarity. The DNA test confirmed what I'd sensed forever. Edward wasn't my biological father. His lifelong coldness stemmed from a truth he'd likely always known, but never admitted. I'd taken the test on a whim after a genetic ancestry kit showed no paternal match, the shock giving way to an explanation for my perpetual otherness in the Bennett family. The public revelation shattered the Bennett family's polished facade, years of pretense crumbling under the weight of genetic truth. 2 hours later, after I'd showered and changed into comfortable clothes from the overnight bag I'd packed, a precaution that now felt eerily prescient, my phone rang with Emily's name. I needed to hear a family member's voice, to anchor the upheaval I'd caused, to confirm it was real, beyond my own unraveling world. "Clara, are you okay? Where are you?" Emily's voice was low, likely from a quiet corner of the still crowded estate. Her concern so genuine, it nearly broke my fragile composure. "I'm safe," I said vaguely. "What's going on there?" She sighed heavily. "Total chaos. After you left, Dad ripped open the envelope right at the table, read it for maybe 20 seconds, then started yelling for Mom. She glanced at it and went ghost white. They vanished into his study for about 10 minutes, while everyone just sat there, stunned. Then Dad stormed out, looking for you, saw the Range Rover was gone, and completely unraveled. I've never seen him like that, Clara." Her clinical recounting helped me stay detached, treating the scene like a case study rather than my life imploding. "And Mom?" I asked, bracing myself. "She's locked herself in their bedroom, won't speak to anyone, not even Nathan." The guests cleared out fast after that. Dad's been on the phone in his study for an hour, and Nathan's ranting about some legal claim on the car, which feels like the least of it. She paused, her voice dropping. "Clara, is it true? The test results, are they real?" "Yes," I said simply. "I took it after a genetic test showed no paternal match. Edward Bennett isn't my biological father." Saying it aloud to Emily made it starkly real, no longer just a private truth. "Do you know who is?" she asked gently, her mediator's instinct clear. "The test only rules out Edward, based on a sample from his comb," I explained, sticking to facts to avoid the emotional weight. But given Mom's reaction, and the timing, I suspect it was someone before she married him. Emily was silent for a moment, then asked the question that cut to the core. "How long do you think he's known?" Her insight, as always, saw the heart of the betrayal, not the biology, but the decades of punishment for something I couldn't control. "My whole life," I said, the certainty surprising me. "It explains everything, Emily. Every slight, every impossible benchmark. He wasn't pushing me to improve. He was resenting my existence." The truth hung between us, heavy with unspoken memories of Edward's disparities. "I have to go," Emily said abruptly. "Nathan's coming downstairs, and I don't want him to know we're talking. Text me you're safe, wherever you are. And Clara, whatever happens, I love you the same. This changes nothing between us." Her words pierced my numbness, a lifeline I hadn't expected. After we hung up, I stood at the hotel window, Chicago's skyline glittering over Lake Michigan, the lights both familiar and alien, like my reflection in the glass. Somewhere in this city was Edward, who'd shaped my childhood with deliberate distance, and possibly the man whose DNA I carried. The duality, one father emotionally absent, one biologically present but unknown, offered a strange symmetry, explaining the lifelong sense of being out of place. Near midnight, a text came from Lillian's rarely used private number. I never meant for you to learn this way. It wasn't an affair. There was someone before Edward in college. When I found out I was pregnant, Edward offered to marry me, to give you his name. He tried to love you as his own, but some men can't separate biology from feelings. I failed you both by hiding the truth. Can we meet tomorrow? Just us? You deserve answers. The message confirmed my suspicions but added nuance. Edward as both perpetrator and prisoner of his limitations. Lillian as both complicit and constrained by her era's expectations. I set the phone down without replying. Exhaustion overtaking adrenaline. Tomorrow would demand choices. How much truth I wanted. What ties were worth saving. For now, I let myself sink into dreamless sleep, free from the questions that had haunted me for decades. The week after what I dubbed the reckoning moved in a surreal blur, both sluggish and frenetic. Each day brought revelations that clarified and muddled my sense of self. The morning after my exit, I met Lillian at a quiet cafe far from family circles. Her appearance shocked me. Gone was the poised Bennett matriarch, replaced by a woman who looked older, raw, human. His name was Thomas Keller, she said without preamble, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. We met junior year at Northwestern. He was at IIT, studying engineering. Brilliant, gentle, utterly unsuitable by my parents' standards. They ended it when they found out. A month later, I met Edward at a gala, the right match everyone endorsed. Her story unfolded like a faded photograph. A young woman forced to trade love for status, discovering her pregnancy after the breakup. Edward offered marriage, partly from affection, partly to leverage Lillian's family ties for his construction empire. He swore he'd raise you as his, Lillian said, her gaze distant. And I think he meant it. But from the moment you were born, you had Thomas's eyes, his curiosity, his way of challenging everything. Every time Edward saw you, he saw another man's child, proof of my life before him. Over 3 hours, the hidden history spilled out, explaining the family's undercurrents. Thomas never knew about me, had moved to Seattle post-graduation, built an engineering firm, married, and had 2 children, my half-siblings. Lillian had followed his life through alumni updates and, later, social media, but never reached out, bound by her promise to Edward to bury the past. The hardest question came last. Why didn't you shield me? I asked. Decades of hurt in one sentence. You saw how he treated me compared to Nathan and Emily. You let him undermine every step I took to earn his approval. Why? Her face collapsed with grief. I failed you, she admitted. No excuses. Each time I thought to tell you why he couldn't love you fully. It felt too destructive. Then years passed, and the lie grew too big. I told myself you were strong, that you'd built a life beyond his approval. I didn't see until yesterday how much it still drove you. The conversation ended without closure, only the start of a fragile, honest bond that would take years to rebuild. The next day brought another shift. An email from Thomas Keller, my biological father, responding to the cautious message I'd sent after finding him through public records. His reply was measured but warm. "I'm stunned to learn of you, Clara. I need time to process, but I'd like to connect when I'm ready. I see you're a lawyer in San Francisco. I'll be there next month for a conference. Perhaps coffee, if you're open to it." His simple acknowledgement of my career, free of judgment, felt like a balm, hinting at a connection unburdened by Bennett baggage. Amid this, work grounded me. My boss called midweek about a client meeting. "The Harper account wants your case strategy presented in person," she said. "They asked for you specifically, Clara. Your name's getting around." The validation, tied to my own merit, reinforced what I'd overlooked. My worth wasn't tied to the Bennett name, but to my own actions. Edward made contact 6 days post-reunion via his lawyer. A stiff letter demanding the Range Rover's return and threatening a suit over defamatory public claims about paternity. The contrast between Edward's cold legal demand and Thomas Keller's measured human email clarified everything. Character, not genetics, defined true kinship. I directed my attorney to arrange the Range Rover's return, emphasizing that DNA evidence, by its nature, wasn't defamatory. Nathan stayed silent, his loyalty to Edward predictable, given their shared blood and worldview. Emily, however, called daily, our bond deepening through raw conversations about the family dynamics we'd both seen, but never fully named. "He's controlled the story our whole lives," she said during a late-night call. "Pitting us against each other for approval, he never gave fairly. I benefited from it, but I always saw how it hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." Her words, validating a lifetime of uneven treatment, healed wounds I hadn't realized still ached, their power surpassing any lab result. 6 months after the reckoning, my life had shifted in ways both subtle and seismic. Weekly therapy sessions unraveled the tangle of conditional love and performance pressure that had fueled my success, helping me see my achievements as mine, not offerings for Edward's approval. My relationship with Lillian grew more real. Her polished Bennett matriarch act, replaced by honest, sometimes painful talks about choices, consequences, and the love that had always existed beneath the family's facade. I met Thomas Keller at a cozy diner near San Francisco's Embarcadero, the strange mirror of my own gestures in a stranger's face, both jarring and comforting. "You have my mother's sharp mind," he said over coffee, hours into a conversation that flowed effortlessly. "But that fire, when you talk about legal strategy, that's from my side, I think." Our connection grew cautiously, neither forcing a father-daughter bond, but finding common ground in shared curiosity and traits I'd never seen in the Bennetts. Like my love for complex puzzles, it was a tentative start, unburdened by the weight of past expectations. Thanksgiving marked a turning point. I accepted Emily's invitation to her home, skipping the traditional Bennett estate gathering. Edward refused to attend if I was there, his rejection now stirring pity rather than pain, his limitations clearer as my healing deepened. "He can't change," Emily said, as we chopped vegetables in her kitchen, her kids laughing with her husband nearby. "Not won't. Can't. His whole identity hinges on truths your existence challenges." Her insight, free of blame, reflected our shared acceptance of an unyielding reality. Later, Lillian called, her voice steadier than the polished tone of my childhood. "I'm proud of you, Clara." she said simply. Not for your career or your condo, though those are incredible. I'm proud of who you are, your strength, your ability to find truth in lies. I should have said it every day. The words I'd chased from Edward for 34 years, given freely by the parent who'd always loved me despite her flaws, landed with a healing weight, untainted by conditions. As the call ended, I realized the deepest truth of this 6-month journey. Family isn't defined by blood or legal ties, but by those who see and love you authentically, without demanding you play a role. The Range Rover, bought to win Edward's approval, had been returned and sold. The proceeds invested in my future. Therapy, a passion project, a life built for me. More crucially, I'd reclaimed the energy once spent on an unwinnable quest, redirecting it to relationships that nourished Emily's support, Lillian's honesty, Thomas's cautious openness, and to work driven by joy, not proof of worth. The path from that chaotic family dinner to this new balance wasn't neat. Some days brought setbacks, moments of doubt, Edward's lawyer's letters, but the trajectory trended toward healing. The truest growth showed in quiet moments, waking on a random Wednesday without weighing my worth, celebrating a case win for its own sake, living from authenticity rather than desperation. The question of my biological origins, once all-consuming, faded in importance compared to the values I chose to live by, the love I accepted as real, the truth I claimed as mine. As Thanksgiving ended, I stood in Emily's backyard, watching the stars over Chicago's suburbs, and reflected on the journey. Have you ever found that family isn't always blood? Sometimes, those meant to love us unconditionally wound us deepest. I'd love to hear your thoughts. How you've built your own chosen family, or stood up to those who couldn't see your value. If my story struck a chord, please like, follow, and share with someone who might need a reminder. Your worth doesn't depend on anyone's validation. Sometimes, reclaiming your power means walking away from those who never deserved it.